Hello, my name is Oren Kashi. I am a hybrid cloud tech specialist focusing on DevOps and IBM Cloud. I just wanted to take you guys through a demo today of how would we manage a application that has multiple parts, both on-premise and off-premise, some parts that are running in Cloud Foundry on a public cloud and some parts that are going to be running locally. But in particular with a focus on running continuous integration, continuous delivery on containerized components. So in the slide that you're looking at here, we have a simplified view of what we have going on. If you look all the way on the right, we will see the actual application that is running that we call Comet. And Comet is just a online auto insurance application that puts together and ties together a few different microservices. And if you look inside the center, there are a couple of icons. So one of them is an account service, a vehicle service, there's coverage. We're using a weather service, and we are also have a quote service that is running on-premise somewhere. And when a user logs in, they'll be able to fill in some information and be able to continue, and get a quote for their auto insurance. But the focus of the demo is not on the application itself, but as to how do we deploy, how do we do continuous integration and continuous deployment with a container. So in the chart that you're looking at in the center section here, we're looking at the three environments that we have. So we have a dev environment, which is just a local instance of Minikube. We have a QA environment, which is on the IBM Cloud, so it's the Kubernetes service on the IBM Cloud. And we have a production environment, which is IBM's Cloud Private, running on in our local data center. And what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can progress through these different environments using Kubernetes and using our containerized version of the application. So we've gone ahead and taken one part of this application, which is the user interface. It's a Node.js application, and we've put it into a Docker container. So a developer has two things to manage here. So let's moving over to the left, we kind of see a little bit of the DevOps pipeline. So we have a developer over here, and he's using GitHub. And in this demo, we're going to be using GitHub to both host our container files, which are, think of them as that those are application specific. And also we're going to have the Kubernetes file, so the deployment YAML, for instance. Now, when an organization is thinking about doing continuous deployment and continuous delivery with containers in Kubernetes, you kind of need to think about what is going to drive what, particularly with using UrbanCode. So UrbanCode Deploy is going to be central to our deployment process, and we are going to be using that to really enforce and standardize on our deployment process and to enforce some governance and give some true auditability. But in short, so our developer is going to make a change, and we're going to see it in GitHub. We're going to see it automatically kick off a build process in Jenkins. Jenkins will go and do the Docker build of the container, and it's going to push it into our Docker trusted registry running on IBM Cloud. This is a private registry for our own container images. Now, what we're going to do is, using that, we're going to be able to then deploy to both dev and QA, and we're going to be able to pull from this particular location to either of those instances. Now, when pushing to production, many organizations want to have a separate store of images that were used in production only. So many times, we might have many more images that are in our dev QA Docker trusted registry as we're cycling through different iterations and correcting bugs that are found throughout the testing process. But in production, we only want the ones that were actually pushed out. So as part of our deployment to production, we're going to see that we're going to do a push into our Docker trusted registry in ICP, and then we will be able to pull that image and actually deploy it to ICP. The other side that the developer is going to work on is the Kubernetes YAML file. And in this demo, I've decided to have a hybrid approach. Instead of having UrbanCode Deploy do everything and deciding everything from within the tool, we are going to have a few changes that by initiating a change in the Kubernetes YAML, which is going to be just changing the image tag that we want to deploy, that will initiate UrbanCode Deploy to actually deploy that to our dev environment immediately and automatically without any intervention. And we'll take a look at that. So I think that gives us a overview of what we're going to see in the demo. And what I'm going to show you guys now actually is the application itself. So if I take a look at our different instances, so this is going to be our dev instance, and you'll see what the application looks like. Just log into here. So we have this Comet insurance application, and what we immediately notice is like, oh no, someone made a mistake. They thought that Comet was relating to the dog, the family dog in Full House, and they put that logo there, and this is not the logo that we want to use. So we need to go ahead and correct that, and that's what's going to be the impetus behind our demo and kind of propagating that throughout our different environments through dev, QA, and prod. And we'll see the same thing if we look at IBM Cloud. So if you were with me, you'd be able to go to this URL and actually view this, and you'll see that this is the same exact application that is deployed in our QA environment, quote unquote, on the Kubernetes service on IBM Cloud. And we also have this deployed in production, which is on ICP. And just to show you the ICP interface, you'll be able to see that this workload is actually deployed as a deployment, and we'll see it come up here in called Comet QI, and you see we exactly have 3 pods that are running. You don't always have to use the UI for ICP. You can also use the kube control command. And looking at this Comet UI deployment, we're able to see a couple of things. So I did mention that we have 3 pods that are running. We're able to get some information about events, so we're able to see what happened for the deployment. We're able to see if there are any logs regarding this particular deployment, and we'll get that information here. And this is actually at the pod level, so we can choose which particular pod and namespace, which is only Comet UI here, we want to take a look at. And we can also go another way, so if we come back to here, we can actually click on the pod itself that we want to take a look at. We do get information regarding the pods. We can see which container is running in there, so we can see the actual image and the particular tag. We do see any events that happened with it, so going on, starting the container and pulling the container and so forth. And we do see the logs, and we were able to see that from before as well. Okay, so at this point, I think it might make sense for us to take a brief look at what ICP, IBM Cloud Private, actually is, and a bit about our deployment topology for ICP. So if you're not already aware, ICP is IBM's private cloud platform. It's a container orchestration solution built on Kubernetes. There is also a Cloud Foundry option for it as well, if you choose to use that, but we're using here in this demo the Kubernetes aspect. And just to kind of show you what we're really looking at here, so this is the way that I've deployed an ICP onto our infrastructure inside our own data center. So we have a couple of nodes, 6 nodes, 7 nodes in total. Within the ICP cluster itself is located in this middle section here. So this comprises of 1 master node, a management node. The management node does all the computations around logging and metrics and alerting, things of that nature. And then we have a proxy node for access from the outside. And then we also have our worker nodes. In this case, I have 3 worker nodes that I've defined, and you can define more or less as you see fit. We also have a NFS node that I'm going to be using for persistent volumes. Now, you don't have to use NFS. There are other options as well, and we won't actually be using this in this particular demo, but this is one way to set it up. And I also have over here on the right a CI/CD node. So this is where I have Jenkins and UrbanCode Deploy installed, and that's going to kind of be orchestrating all of our deployments that we're going to be looking at throughout this demo. If we go back to IBM Cloud Private, and remember in the screen that I showed you here, we have options of looking at the different workloads, and really these are Kubernetes objects that we have, so these should be very familiar to you. So jobs or stateful sets, replica sets, and deployments, daemon sets. We have Helm releases, so anything that is deployed through Helm, you will be able to see that here. And that's how a lot of the charts for IBM Cloud Private are deployed, and anything that will be available in the catalogs, such as some middleware, will be able to see that. I'll take you brief look at the catalog. And what I have installed here is the Community Edition. So this is free. You can go out and download it, install it, play with it. With the other versions, such as the Cloud Native and Enterprise, you actually get more licenses for some other middleware that is not included in here. But you can kind of take a look through here and kind of see what you are interested in, if there's anything that you would like to deploy. So if you want to deploy Jenkins on ICP, you're able to do that, and just some brief configuration gives you a README up front. Gives you kind of prerequisites and stuff, and you can do configure, and this way you would be able to configure your deployment specifically for your installation, and it would be similar for any of the other objects inside the catalog. Okay, you do have this nice dashboard page when you first come on, so you're able to get a look at your private cloud. So you're able to see how many nodes, and you see that I have 6 nodes that are active within my cluster that I showed you before. How much of my shared storage, so of the storage that I have available on my NFS that I've installed, what is available to me, and we see that I'm using 70 gigabytes, I have 235 gigabytes available, and I have 10 that are released, which is really that depends on the kind of the configuration of the persistent volume. There is both recycle and retain. I have a few that are retain, and I'll show you that shortly. And then the deployments. So 100% of my deployments are healthy, and I'm able to see also information about my GPU, memory, and CPU utilization. So you can see I'm using 52%, using 4% of my CPU, and so forth. We're able to see, so we took a look at workloads and some of the deployments just prior. Able to see things along the lines of configuration. So if I have any config maps defined or secrets, I will see them shown up in here. And I can also take a look at some of the other aspects. So IBM Cloud Private, in addition to just kind of giving you a Kubernetes container orchestration platform, it ties together some other aspects and some other open source tools to give you the ability to do alerting, logging, monitoring, metering. So some tools like Grafana, Kibana, the Elk stack, that is all tied together. So we can start off and kind of take a look at a few of these. So we see storage is here. We're able to see all the persistent volumes that I have defined that is available. And here you actually see the 10 gigabytes in total that is in retain. It was once claimed, but it has since been released, and I only have one that is bound. And if I want to see all the claims that I have, this is what I'm able to take a look at here. Now, if I wanted to take a look at, let's say, some metering or monitoring or logging, I can click on the corresponding menu item. So in this case, we're going to Kibana. And we can take a look here if we're looking for something specific. So for some specific incident that we're looking for, we can add a filter, and we can say, well, let's say in a particular namespace for, let's say, a particular application. So in ours, we have it deployed to Comet. You can see if anything does come up. So we do see corresponding log entries over here as well. We can expand this out, take a look at it in tabular format, and we could also convert it to JSON if we had wanted to. Okay, we have some other Kibana options that are here, so some visualization and dashboarding, but we won't go into detail in this demo. And furthermore, along the same lines, we also have the ability to take a look at some monitoring and metering. So if we take some metering, we're able to see how our instance is of IBM Cloud Private and our nodes are doing overall. So I do have my different nodes, and we're able to see how many processors are available. We're able to change this around and see how many containers do I have running. So we see I had 1, and now I went up to climbing up. It says 1.57. So I guess it was over the time frame. It's kind of an average out, and that's what it's kind of showing me. Okay, and if we wanted to, we could see what else is in the menu here. So this is under platform. We can take a look at things like nodes. So we can see all the nodes, and these are, if you remember the chart that I showed you from the beginning about how we've set up the cluster. So here you see the exact IP addresses and the role of each particular node. So we see worker, worker, management, proxy, and master, and we're able to see all of them and if they're schedulable or not. Okay, so that's what the application looks like. So inside GitHub, just to show you what it looks like from here, we have our container code. This is essentially just a Node.js application. And really what we're going to change is the image inside here. So as you see right now, we actually have an image of dog, and that's not the correct image that we want. So what we'll do is we'll go into here, we'll upload the new image, and that should automatically kick off a Jenkins build. We have Jenkins running over here in this Jenkins project, and this is our instance of UrbanCode Deploy. So we can see across our 3 environments what we have deployed. So we do see that across dev, QA, and prod, we have all the same versions of each of these. Now, for those of you who don't know much about UrbanCode Deploy, there is it's kind of broken down by components, and then on top of components you have applications that kind of tie them together. So I have 2 components that are currently making up my application, and that's what we've containerized for now. But we have our YAML file, so this is corresponding to the deployment YAML, which I haven't shown you yet, and I'll show you in just a minute. And we also have a component that symbolizes which container image we're pulling from the repository, so particularly which tag we're using. And here you see we're using tag 17, and we're using version 2.6 of our YAML in each of our environments. I'll show you now what our deployment YAML looks like. So I have another repository for the Kubernetes files, and we have a Comet UI deployment YAML. And I've just done all 3 in one. You don't have to do all 3 in one, but just for my own ease of use, I've put them in here. We'll see at the bottom we actually have a deployment defined. You do see that tag that we put in here, 17, and that's the one that we will be changing. You'll also see some interesting looking text with particularly like around these @ signs. So @ registry @ image space @ initial delay seconds. And you were probably thinking to yourself, these are not normal YAML and Kubernetes syntax. What's going on here? And this is one of the beauties of UrbanCode Deploy, is that UrbanCode, what we've done is we've actually parameterized these or tokenized these for UrbanCode Deploy. And what we're doing is depending on the environment that we're deploying to, we're going to dynamically give it different values. So if we're going to decide to deploy to dev or to QA or to production, we might have different values for initial delay seconds and period seconds. So for instance, if I'm deploying to dev, maybe I don't want my liveliness probe hitting my application every 5 seconds to check that it's alive. Like, I don't really care at that point. I'm just doing some more lower level testing. So maybe I want to set that at 10 minutes. For instance, for replicas, right? Maybe when I'm deploying to dev, I don't necessarily need 5 different replicas of my pod. I only need 1. So what I'm able to do is in UrbanCode Deploy, I'm able to control per environment, or really define per environment, what values I want for each of these. And we'll see also here is the registry. So, and as I mentioned, that for dev and QA, we're going to be pulling from the Docker Trusted Registry in IBM Cloud. But for production, we want to pull it out of the ICP Docker Trusted Registry. So that's going to get dynamically changed. We have a service defined to open up and make our UI available to the open internet. And well, this wouldn't open it because it's a cluster IP, but the way that we make it open to the internet is really through using this ingress. So ingress will make it available to the outside, and and this is just the definition of the ingress, and it's just going to connect to this particular service. And particularly depending on where I'm actually going to be deploying it to, I would have a different host name, whether I'm deploying it to dev, QA, or prod. And again, that's via the same tokenization from within UrbanCode Deploy. Okay, before actually going to make any changes, let me just show you where that is located in UrbanCode Deploy. So if, for instance, I'll click on our production environment and I'll go to our configuration, you do see I have some properties that are here. So that's where all of this comes from. So remember period seconds, so this is set to 240. We have namespace, well, that's set over here. We have our registry, so you'll notice the registry is set to the ICP cluster registry. You see the replicas request is for 3 pods. And if I'll show you an equivalent one, let's say for QA, you will see it's actually slightly different. We will see that we'll only have 2 pods that are requested for the replica set, and you'll see that the registry is already different. So it's using the one that's on the IBM Cloud. We do see that the period seconds is higher. I don't need it to ping as often as not, and obviously the ingress hostname is going to be different as well. Okay. Great. So let's get this going. What we're going to notice is that I'm going to first make a change and upload the correct image to our Comet Docker container and have Jenkins rebuild it. So I'm going to go into the images, and we'll just do it all through the UI here, just for nice ease of use. We're going to upload our new file, and we'll see here we actually have the good logo. This is the one that we want. So let me just rename this to the bad one, and I'll rename this to the same name so that it can be uploaded. Okay, and now we have the good logo, and I'll open it here and I'll say corrected logo, and we'll commit this change. So that's all we did for now. If we go into Jenkins, we should recognize that, we should see that there'll be a new build that is being kicked off, and we actually do see number 18. So this is set up through webhooks and integration with Jenkins. And if we want, we can actually take a look in here and see what is going on in the back end. And really, this is just running the Docker build file that was in that GitHub repository. So just building the images, the different layers, and then it's just going to be checking it into the IBM Cloud repository. And great, so now we're actually success, and we should see that we have a new image that has been checked into IBM Cloud. We can actually go into here. This is just using the UI version of it. And we do see that we should have 18 in here, which is the one that was just created. And again, you don't have to use the UI. You can actually use the terminal as well and just do a check that way. But for now, that will be this will suffice for us. We know it did get checked in correctly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our Kubernetes YAML file, and I say, well, I just want to deploy this version 17. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to use the Kubernetes deployment YAML and changing it inside the GitHub location to be the driver behind things. So what I need to do is I need to just change this to tag 18. And I don't necessarily have to do it this way. We can have done this all through UrbanCode Deploy as well. Give it a comment, and we'll commit the change. Great. Now, I like things to be a little neat, so I'm actually just going to create a release out of this. So we'll just draft a new release. We'll call this 2.7, and we'll just use the recent commit that we did, right? 18. And we'll publish the release. And great, there we go. So let's go into UrbanCode Deploy, and what we should notice is that, remember I mentioned the concept of components. So we have different components that are in here, and you can ignore anything that's not the Comet UI, but this YAML one is particularly the component for deployments. And immediately you see that if we go into versions, that we've just deployed in version 2.7 that we created. So that's in here. And very quickly, if I go to the dashboard, we already see we have a deployment process that is running. And if you take a look, and we'll look at this process, this is actually deploying to our Minikube instance. I didn't show you the process just yet, and I'll show this to you as soon as this completes. So don't worry about what everything is in here at this moment, but I'll explain to you and I'll show you what the process actually looks like. But we do see that this was a success. If I come back and I take a look at the application from the inventory view, I do see that we have differences between our environments. So as before, where everything was 2.6 and tag 17 of our Docker container, we have here already 2.7 of our YAML file and already tag 18 of our container. So we should see a difference between the two. And just to prove that out, let's go in and take a look and see that it actually was updated. And so you see here, this is the old one that we saw with the adorable Comet dog. And if we refresh it, we do see the new logo that we had wanted to be. So I'm going to take a second and actually just show you what this process looks like of how I've defined the deployment for getting the commit deployed on Kubernetes. So I'm going to click on processes, and I've basically created two processes here that are different. One is an uninstall process, if I wanted to completely just remove it from any installation, and one is a actual installation. So I'll show you what this looks like. And I'm assuming you know, or the viewer has a little bit of knowledge about UrbanCode Deploy, but UrbanCode Deploy gives you a very intuitive graphical process designer where you're able to drag and drop steps from the palette that is on the left-hand side. So any step that you want, like a shell step, you're able to just come into here and drag it onto the palette to perform any sort of activities. And that's what each of these little purple sections are. So what I'm doing here is that it looks a lot more scary than it is, but that's just because I have one process regardless of which environment that we're deploying to. So we have a switch here on this deployment environment, and it's saying, well, switch depending on the environment that I'm deploying to. If I'm deploying to dev, then follow this path. If I'm deploying to QA, then follow this path. And if it's prod, then follow this path. So I'm able to do a switch like that. And for dev, it's saying, do a check if Minikube is running. If not, well, go ahead and start it. If it is, then set the Minikube context and move on to replacing the tokens and processing the YAML. And this is the step of where we're dynamically inserting into the YAML file. Remember where we had those @ replicas @. So we're creating and we're dynamically replacing that on the fly in these two steps. And then in the deployment, depending on the environment that we're deploying to, we have some slightly different activities that need to go on. So again, dev, QA, and prod. So go and apply that particular resource, which at the end is really just a kubectl apply or a kubecontrol apply -f and the file name, and then we finish. Now for QA, it's a similar process, but except we first need to log into the IBM Cloud. We need to get the particular kubeconfig file for our particular cluster, and then continue throughout the process. And for production, if you remember, we actually added a step where we want to do is we want to check in the image into our ICP Docker Trusted Registry. So what we're doing is we have this extra step in here that is going to be doing that, and this is just particularly just a shell step, and you can see in here what exactly are the tags, really what are the commands that are run, and these are all properties in UrbanCode Deploy, so I can kind of variabilize them and think of it as just a variable. So remember the registry that I mentioned. So if I ever change the registry, all I have to do is just change it in one place, and then it'll propagate elsewhere. So I don't have to worry about every single location that it is in. And many of these are actually just plugins. So there are over 200 or so plugins that are available on the IBM UrbanCode Deploy website, depending on what you need to integrate with and what you need to add into your process. If you do have some on-premise parts of your application that you need to integrate with, such as WebSphere or Oracle or some database, there are all sorts of plugins that are there. So I encourage you to go take a look and see what is available for you to use, and to really expand your usage for the process designer. So this is what the actual deployment process looks like. There's a similar process for the uninstall. The uninstall is kind of just the reverse, a little bit simpler, but depending on the environment that we're deploying to, we're just going to go and do the set the context and delete. You do notice that some of these are red arrows. So I do have this one red arrow over here. So UrbanCode allows you to do alternates, or basically conditionals. So this means if this step fails, then I want you to kind of break off the happy path and do some alternate path of activities. This is really useful in dealing with errors on the fly during your deployments. And in this case, I'm going to say, well, if Minikube is not running, then I can't really delete it, and I just want to end gracefully. Instead of continuing down. And that's all this process is saying. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and push this deployment to our other environments and make sure that everything deploys accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a request to deploy this to our QA environment, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to choose our deployment process, and I'll choose my version. Now I don't have to always choose a particular version. I could choose something in here like latest available, or one of these other options. But just for our demo's completeness, I'm just going to choose particularly the one that I want. Remember, I don't need to choose this because we're having the the Kubernetes YAML be the driver here, so I don't need to choose one of this. It'll automatically be inferred from what we've entered in the Kubernetes YAML file tag, which is 18, and we will click OK, and we'll submit this. And we can watch this actually running in real time. So I will expand this out, and we can see the steps that are going on. Okay, so now it's actually doing the apply, and we're done. So everything was successfully deployed. We'll just do a quick confirmation in QA and check, and we do see that they match. Additionally, UrbanCode does give you the ability to do compares. So if I had many components, like think of it, if you have 15 or 20 different microservices that are together, it's kind of much more difficult to visualize. But I can just do a quick compare to a particular environment. So I'll compare it to QA, and I'll see that actually everything matches across the board. So a nice little tool that is there. And so we saw that this was correct, and let's actually go to our QA environment and see. So this is the old image, and let's see if this worked. If I'll refresh this, we see the new Project Comet logo, and our application is good to go. And we'll do the same thing for production. Now, you do see, and you did see before, that I had to choose an individual component version. Now that's all fine and dandy in my case, where I just have really one component that I need to choose from. But in the case of using microservices, where you have 15 or 20 different components that are running around and trying to keep track of which component versions need to play correctly with other component versions, and sometimes they're not even labeled as nicely as 2.6 or 2.7. UrbanCode does have an ability to create snapshots. And what a snapshot essentially is, it's kind of like a grouping of components and their versions that are known to play nicely together, and that these have to go out as a particular version of our application. I didn't do that here, and we can, at some point you can take a look at that. If you wanted to do a deeper dive, you could look at the documentation of how to do that. But that's an option as well. But what you would do is you would come into here and you'd select a snapshot, and that would automatically select all the relevant components and their component versions. So we'll do the same thing here. I will click submit, and we can watch the process run to deploy locally. Now I'm going to go through and actually also prove to you that it did really deploy based on those values that we had decided inside, for example, like the replica sets. So for how many pods did we want to have, and we'll take a look at it through the command line as soon as this completes in all three environments. But we can watch what's going on, just like we did before. And if you ever wanted to know what the particular step was doing, so for instance, if you wanted to know what login to ICP was doing, you can actually kind of just click here, and you'll get the console outputs. You'll get some information regarding properties that were in existence at the time, some environment information, and then you'll actually see the exact commands that are run. So you'll see that this is really the command that was run to log into ICP. And you'll see the output of it as well. So should any step fail, you can always come into here and actually see what your console output was to try to debug. We do see that everything was a success. And we can just come back to here and confirm that it was indeed added. And we do see that they all match. Everything is 18 and 2.7. And let's do a confirmation. So this is, remember, our ICP environment. And we will click refresh, and we see that the new image is there. As a further proof, let's go back into our IBM Cloud Private. I'm going to show you that the image was in fact checked into the local repository. So we do see our Comet UI image repository, and we do see tag number 18 that is in there. So it did get checked into there, and we can take a look at the actual deployment. So we'll come into deployment. We do see this Comet UI. We see everything is available, and it's up and running. And we can actually see, the pods were 1 minute ago is when they were started. We can see some information here. If you wanted to see more information about the pods, we can do that, as about the container itself, and we see the particular tag that it's running. And if you wanted to see logs, we can get that in here as well. So let's take a quick look at things through the command line. Let me just see what the current context is. Okay, so it's pointing now to my ICP cluster, so my production instance. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little cheat sheet away. So put them in my commit namespace, and we do see that there are in fact 3 pods. If I do switch contexts and I take a look at our Minikube context, we can do the same thing. Okay, and we'll run the same command. We do see that there's 1, and if I wanted to actually, just for completeness sake, I need to do an export of the kube config file to view it. And we see that it is in fact 2 pods that are running. So you saw we did have 1, 2, and 3 that we asked for in UrbanCode Deploy, and it did do the same. So hopefully this gives you a nice overview as to what DevOps can look like using containers and UrbanCode Deploy and Jenkins. Thank you.